opened your eyes to the biting cold creeping through the cracked wooden window frame, an unforgiving freeze that seeped into your bones like an ancient whisper. The air hung heavy and silent, blanketing the entire village under an endless layer of unyielding ice. Beneath your bare feet, the frozen tatami floor pressed cold and unforgiving, its damp chill lingering like a shadow you couldn't shake. Outside, the stillness was broken only by the faint rustling of bare branches, swaying softly as if murmuring long-lost tales of warmer days just out of reach. The sharp scent of wet firewood, mixed with the dank smell of cold earth, infiltrated the house, dulling your senses in a slow, creeping way. Your first task, as always, was to check the dwindling rice supplies stored in worn sacks that groaned beneath the grip of frost, their contents slowly crystallizing into despair. With trembling, cracked fingers, you cautiously drew a small handful, each grain feeling like a silent testament to the relentless winter that drained the life from all it touched. What had once been a simple ritual, the tea ceremony, now unfolded with tense quiet, preparing the hot drink for the local lord, while the cold seemed to freeze even the very air around you. Every carefully repeated movement, the scraping of frozen tools, the sealing of paper windows, deepened the endless monotony of this little ice age, where days faded like pale shadows under a soulless sky. This cold wasn't like any inconvenience of the modern world, not like the frustration of a dead phone battery or internet outage. No, this was a silence so thick it pressed on your chest, a quiet that promised withdrawal from life itself. You imagined how fragile your last piece of firewood would feel in the grasp of the flames, or if the flames would even catch at all. The endless repetition of your routine offered a strange comfort, a rhythm you clung to amid the vast, frozen quiet. As you moved again through the narrow hallways, your breath forming soft clouds you could almost touch, the distant murmur of neighbors echoed, a sound like wind brushing through frost-covered rooftops. Yet beneath the calm, a subtle shift brushed at your skin, a tension almost too small to catch, but impossible to ignore. Something had changed in the stillness, something beyond the ever-present cold and quiet. Before the night fully closed in, you paused at the edge of the village, where the ice-thick trees seemed to lean closer, shadows pooling at their roots. The unease settled heavier now, a whisper under your ribs, urging you forward into the unknown silence. Hey, before Morpheo slips you fully into sleep, take a moment to check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button has disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the next sleepy tales we weave. While you're here, leave a like soft as a pillow, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your presence keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. You stepped outside into the biting silence that grasped the village like a cold hand refusing to loosen its grip. The frozen trees leaned inward, their branches intertwining above you, like ancient fingers weaving a web of shadow and ice. Each breath you exhaled transformed into faint clouds that hovered close to your face, dissipating slowly into the unyielding stillness. The soil beneath your boots cracked softly with the freeze, brittle as old parchment, while the pale sky spilled a muted light, as if reluctant to reveal the secrets beneath its faded veil. Your eyes adjusted to the dimness, tracing the uneven lines of the frozen path ahead. The snow lay thick and heavy, its surface crusted with ice that hissed faintly underfoot. You paused, feeling the weight of the lingering cold seep deeper, numbing your fingers despite the thin cloth wrapped around them. A quiet flutter stirred in your chest, not fear, but an unsettled anticipation tugging at the edges of your awareness. The village, wrapped in its brittle shell, seemed to hold its breath with you. Pulling your scarf tighter, you moved slowly toward the outer edge of the clearing, where the gnarled limbs of the forest began their silent watch. The shadows pooled low, a well of darkness that swallowed fragments of light, swallowing your footsteps and muffling the dull crunch of snow. You noticed the faint scent of pine resin, sharp and resinous, mingling with the earthy dust scent that eked out from beneath the frozen ground. A whisper of life hidden beneath the cold grave of winter. Your task was clear, but daunting: to find the last dry bundle of kindling, rumored to be hidden near the fallen oak, a task that had become all the more urgent, with firewood dwindling dangerously low. The thought of rekindling flame offered a fragile ember of hope, a brief warmth against the suffocating frost. Each step was deliberate, slow. You pressed the heels of your boots into the icy soil, testing stability beneath the deceptive crust. The sharp snap of a brittle twig startled you, sending a shiver down your spine despite the cold that already gripped your frame. You listened intently, the only sound the faint rustle of frosted leaves brushing together as a cold breeze whispered through the skeletal branches overhead. Your fingers brushed against the rough bark of the trees, each ridge a cold, jagged wave that traveled up your arm, the sensation grounding you in the present moment. The subdued world around you seemed magnified, the distant tap of frozen sap dropping to the frozen ground, the muted thump of hardened snow tumbling gently from a branch, the low, almost imperceptible hum of winter settling its claim. You reached the fallen oak, its massive trunk split and cracked, icicles hanging like fragile glass shards from its limbs. Beneath its sheltering weight, the snow thinned, revealing a patch of frozen earth peppered with dried leaves stiffened by frost. You knelt slowly, dragging your breath deep and slow as you pushed your gloves into the cold dust. Your nails scraped lightly across brittle twigs, the sensation sharp, brittle. After a careful search, your palm closed around a small, dense bundle of perfectly dry kindling, a treasure hidden amid the frozen decay. Raising the bundle, you savored its fragile warmth, untouched by winter's grasp. This moment, small as it was, painted a faint stroke of defiance across the vast, frozen canvas of your world. You stood, cradling the fragile wood as if it held the last pulse of life within it. Turning back, you traced your path slowly, the journey back pulling at your muscles worn by cold and tension. Your every movement echoed in the breathless air, deliberate and weighed down by a heavy quiet. Back inside the thin walls of your home, the kindling felt impossibly warm. You moved to the hearth, and as you arranged the small sticks, your fingers trembled. The anticipation of flame, a delicate thread, weaving hope through the oppressive chill. You struck the flint gently, the sharp spark catching on dried moss, breathing life into the fragile bundle. The flicker grew, a timid dance that cast wavering shadows across the frost-lined walls. You watched, mesmerized by the slow rise of heat, a quiet comfort blooming in the cold room's heart. The smoke curled lazily upward, carrying away the scent of damp earth and cold decay, replaced by the faint warmth of burning wood. Heat wrapped around you, soft and delicate, like a whispered promise. The oppressive silence of the outside world seemed to recede, as if held at bay by the flickering light. Yet beneath the fragile warmth, a restless pulse lingered. The shadowy forest outside held secrets untold, and their quiet breath stirred at the edge of your senses. You found yourself drawn to the window once more, eyes tracing the fragile tracery of ice crystals forming like spiderwebs on the glass. The faintest movement caught your gaze, a flicker of shadow shifting just beyond the trees, barely perceptible in the dim light. Your heart tightened, a cold knot threading through your chest. But the fire's glow was steady, slow, sure, and in that moment, you allowed yourself the fragile comfort of warmth. Yet that whisper of movement outside would not let go, hanging in the frozen air like a thread ready to pull you into something beyond the known cold. As the night deepened and the flames whispered their quiet song, a shadow detached from the darkness outside, fleeting, deliberate, and watching. You could feel it before you could see it, a presence coiled at the edge of your world, patient and silent, waiting for the right moment to unravel the unyielding quiet. And you knew, deep below the comforting crackle of firewood, that the winter's grip held more than just cold. You pulled the thin coat tighter around your shoulders as the fire's fragile glow faded behind you, swallowed by the thick darkness closing in like a soft, suffocating blanket. Each step away from the hearth was measured, slow, deliberate, as if the frozen air itself might shatter you into shards if you dared move too hurriedly. The cold pressed in from every side, seeping through the fabric and resting on your skin, its whisper cruel and unyielding, yet strangely familiar. Your breath hung before you, in pale clouds, dissolving too quickly into the vast silence that swallowed the village whole. The weight of the kindling in your arms was light, but it felt like the entire world settled upon your hands. The brittle stick seemed a fragile promise amid this frozen wasteland, a soft flame in a world sliding into endless shadow. Outside, trees bled cold into the night, their skeletal branches drawing tight knots in the sky. The snow underfoot shifted with a crackle, sharp and precise, echoing faintly through the empty hollows of the village like a slow heartbeat. You edged forward, eyes searching the shifting gray-black shapes just beyond the rim of firelight, the darkened outlines of the forest's guard. The wind, barely a breath, stirred the scent of pine resin again, green and sharp, carving a path through the dense scent. Of frost and earth, you could feel the pale pulse of life hidden somewhere beneath, whispering promises you couldn't yet grasp, cautious murmurs slipping just beneath the surface of the frozen silence. The cold didn't just settle on your skin, it rooted itself deep in your bones, slow and relentless. Your boots made soft impressions in the snow, fragile and fleeting. Each movement was a careful negotiation with the ice beneath, a dance requiring patience and focus. Your fingers itched beneath your gloves, desperate for warmth, and yet you resisted the urge to rush, knowing the brittle landscape demanded stillness and attention. Overhead, an owl's distant call broke the silence, sharp and haunting, trailing off, then swallowed by the vast night. Your ears caught the faint stir of dry leaves skittering against frost-bitten bark, the rustle delicate but somehow charged, as if the forest itself breathed in cautious watchfulness. Shadows shifted, elongated into strange shapes, and you felt the weight of unseen eyes brushing the edges of your vision, urging you forward, deeper into a world caught between life and death. You reached the weathered signpost, marking the path that led out from the village, a crooked sentinel dusted in rime. It was nearly hidden beneath a veil of frost, the carved symbols softened and blurred by time and ice. You paused for a moment, your pulse matching the slow rhythm of the crackling fire left behind, tethering you briefly to warmth and safety. But safety was a fleeting illusion here. The cold twisted everything, a relentless presence that promised no sanctuary. Pressing onward, the path narrowed, squeezed tight by frozen limbs that reached in from every side. Each breath you took crystallized instantly in the air, tiny diamonds hanging brief and glittering before falling away. The world seemed to slow, each second expanding into an eternity filled with the faint scrape of ice, the crunch of snow, the rhythmic thud of your heart echoing inside your ribs. Ahead, the shape of a fallen birch caught your eye, a pale, cracked shadow draped in frost and snow. You knelt beside it, your fingertips tracing the sappy scar torn open years ago, now frozen stiff with winter's grip. Around the base, the snow formed small drifts, thick and powdery, untouched save for your careful disturbance. Beneath the bark, the faint promise of sap lingered somewhere out of reach, a cold pulse of life battling the endless freeze. You gathered a handful of small branches fallen nearby, their surfaces rough and sharp, the brittle ends snapping quietly between your fingers. Each break whispered the constant fragility of survival. How the smallest crack could widen and scatter everything. You tucked the slender sticks into your coat's fold, layering each piece with slow, steady care, as if trying to preserve the heat they might one day hold. Turning back, the stillness stretched longer, the sky darkening into deeper swaths of indigo and charcoal. The wind crept closer now, thin and cutting, threading its way through the trees with an insistent chill. The looming forest seemed to lean inward, the shadows twisting and pooling, like ink spilled across a pale canvas. You heard a soft sound behind you, almost imperceptible, a faint rustle, lighter than a leaf's fall, closer than anything natural should be here. Your breath hitched, heart tightening against your ribs. Every hair on your skin stood alert, nerves flaring, despite the exhaustion that tugged at your limbs. You froze, every sense straining into the dark, reaching out for the source of the shifting sound. The snow beneath your feet whispered its fragile complaint, the cold pressing harder against your aura. A single flicker tore across the edge of the tree line, a shadow severed briefly from the black. It moved with intent, deliberate, but cautious, almost spectral against the brittle night. Your eyes could barely hold its shape, a slim, dark silhouette slipping through the woven branches like a secret on the move. You felt the forest close in around you, its breath cold and expectant. The fire's warmth was gone now, replaced by the chill that gnawed at your resolve. Yet even as the pressing silence threatened to swallow you whole, a sliver of awareness flickered deep inside. The sense that something unseen, a motion between the shadows, was reaching toward you. Not with the fury of a storm, but with the quiet patience of winter itself, holding something just beyond the shiver of your skin, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge from the stillness and unravel the fragile calm you clung to. And in that suspended breath between heartbeats, beneath the weight of the endless cold, you understood that this night would not simply pass into the next. Something was coming, an unspoken whisper riding the frost, threading through the dark like a secret ready to break you free from the frozen quiet forever. You hesitated a moment beneath the skeletal trees, the cold breath of the forest pressing in like a slow, patient weight. The shadow that slipped through the branches no longer felt distant, its presence a tangible pulse at the edge of your senses. The brittle air bore a faint rustle, too calculated, too deliberate to be mere winter's whimsy. Your feet rooted in the snow, each breath a thin silver thread against the dense dark. With measured steps, you turned away from the forest's looming grasp, the worn bundle of kindling safe in your coat, but heavy with unspoken promise. The village lay ahead, silent but vigilant. You noticed how the snow swallowed your footprints almost as soon as they formed, blurring the trail behind you as if erasing evidence of your passage. The muted sky stretched wide, a pale expanse refusing to yield any comfort beyond its cold sheet of gray. Your fingers ached under the thin gloves, yearning for the warmth the fragile fire had offered just moments before. The path twisted slowly beneath your gaze, its icy crust reflecting the faint, brittle light. Every crunch echoed like a whispered secret, a rhythmic reminder of your solitude in this vast, frozen expanse. The wind breathed low and cold, threading through the narrow alleys as if carrying voices just beyond hearing. Fragile and fleeting, like the distant memory of a warm day you once knew. You paused beside the crooked signpost again, the frost dulling the carved symbols whose meanings had long faded into obscurity. For a moment, you let your palm rest on the rough wood, the brittle surface biting gentle through your glove. The cold seemed to seep deeper here, a slow burn sliding along your skin, settling in your bones like a warning. The stillness thickened, spread through the village with a weight that pressed quiet and unyielding. The familiar shapes of houses rose around you, their paper windows sealed tight against the chill, walls groaning softly with the weight of ice. You listened closely, tracing the subtle creaks and sighs, the barely audible settling of frozen earth beneath timber and stone. It was a symphony of endurance, a fragile rhythm that spoke of lives locked tight against winter's merciless claim. Breath swirling in faint clouds, you moved deliberately among these frozen sentinels, each footfall slow, deliberate, cautious. You paused before the door of your home, the wood rough and cold where fingers traced silent lines in the frost. The wind tugged, pressing against your back like a silent watcher, sending a tremor down your spine you couldn't catch. Inside, the shadowed warmth of the hearth beckoned, a fragile glow pulsing quietly in the center of the room. You set the kindling down gently, the dry sticks whispering softly against the stone hearth. Your hands, trembling slightly from cold and anticipation, arranged the kindling with care, layering each stick, as though protecting a fragile secret within its brittle heart. Drawing the flint slowly from your belt, you cupped it in your hand, feeling the rough edge bite against your palm. A spark, sharp and immediate, leapt to life, tiny but fierce against the cold. The dry moss caught, glowing faintly, and the flame wavered, a fragile dance of light and shadow. It gasped, then found strength, licking slow and sure against the kindling. You watched the fire grow, the warmth pressing outward in lazy waves, the smell of burning wood mingling with the cold earth scent still trapped in your clothes. The flickering light painted soft shadows on paper walls, casting gentle traces that shifted like living memories. Your breath eased, the tight coil inside your chest seeming to loosen just a fraction as the fire's pulse reached out a whispered comfort in the long, frozen night. Yet beyond the fragile barrier of warmth, the forest's shadow lingered, its breath a soft murmur at the window's edge, the ice tracery cracking just barely under unseen touch. You found your gaze drawn to the glass, watching as swirling frost patterns shifted like slow-moving currents. A whispered movement caught in the pale light. Then, just beyond the trembling curtain of ice, a darker shadow stirred, a shape deliberate and still, watching without sound. The edges blurred as if dissolving into the night itself, but you saw it. Your heart jolted, a cold knot tightening deep within, a thread tugging sharp and insistent. You stepped closer to the window, the fire's warmth a fragile shield against the relentless cold pressing outside. The shadow held its place, silent and patient, as if waiting for a fragile moment to slip past your guarded senses. The room grew quieter, the flames crackle the only gentle sound, steady and sure amid the heavy silence that seeped beneath the doorframe. A breath long held seemed to release, and you sensed the night's breath shift, an unseen thread pulling taut between the safety of light and the vast, unknowable dark. And then, in a barely audible whisper that seemed less sound than feeling, a slow, deliberate movement just beyond the glass, the shadow shifted once more, revealing the faintest glint of something strange and unfamiliar in its depths. You pulled back from the window, your breath hitching. The warmth of the hearth felt suddenly fragile, as if the cold outside pressed closer, patient and inevitable, ready to break the brittle calm and unravel the frozen quiet with secrets long buried beneath the ice. In that still moment, with the fire's light flickering behind, you understood that the forest's watch had only just begun, and that whatever waited in the dark was no longer content to remain unseen. You lingered a moment longer at the frost-smeared window, watching the shadow dissolve into the ever-thickening dark outside. The fragile warmth of the fire waned slowly behind you, its dance of light shrinking into hesitant embers, struggling against the cold's relentless claim. Your breath whispered uneven, stirring the thin curtains that traced lazy patterns on the floor. The air felt impossibly still, as if the night itself was holding its breath with bated patience. You shifted, wrapping your arms around yourself, the cold seeping through your thin coat, pressing as though the very night leaned close to listen. Outside, the trees stood stark against a bruised sky, their branches threading skeletal fingers together in silent communion. The scent of pine resin lingered faintly, stubborn and alive even beneath heavy frost. Somewhere beyond the village's brittle edges, the forest whispered, each sound measured, careful, like footsteps paused midway. You stepped away from the window, your boots tracing slow patterns against the tatami floor, the chill gripping the soles of your feet with a slow, invasive hunger. Your fingers, stiff and achingly cold, reached for the wooden ladle resting near the hearth. As you lifted it, the grain of the wood was rough beneath your palm, a subtle reassurance of texture and reality amid the intangible chill that brushed your skin. Water from the kettle steamed faintly, blurring the air with quiet warmth, a fragile reprieve in the frozen stillness. The ritual of making tea was a silent comfort, each movement drawn out with deliberate slowness. You dipped the ladle into the steaming water, feeling the contrast between the heat and cold sharpen your senses. The subtle clink as the water met the cup, the soft hiss as steam unfurled, the faint earthy scent rising up, all became anchors, small islands amid the vast sea of icy quiet enveloping the village. Breathing in deeply, you savored the warmth pooling inside your palms, the fragile comfort of moments reclaimed from the cold. Yet, as the hot tea settled in your chest, a persistent thread of unease clung to your skin. The shadows at the window shifted again, shimmering like slow waves beneath the brittle glass. You turned, slowly, eyes fixed on the frost-covered pane that blurred the forest's silhouette into ghostly shapes. That presence, the one you sensed just beyond reach, moved with purposeful silence, a patient observer, weaving through the skeletal branches. You left the firelight circle, stepping carefully. Toward the door, the weight of the kindling a muted promise against your chest. Your boots sank slightly into the snow outside, the packed surface brittle underfoot, each step a tentative negotiation with the subtle shifts beneath the ice crust. The breath escaping your lips hung thick, small clouds dissolving too quickly into the enveloping dark. The village lay muted and still, wrapped in its coat of frost and silence. The faint murmur of the wind carried with it a brittle song, the soft brush of ice against branches, the distant creak of settling wood, the quiet sigh of frozen earth settling into the deep night. The path toward the far edge wound through gnarled trees whose limbs reached out like fingers, weaving shadows into a dense tapestry that swallowed light and sound. Every sense stretched taut, alert to the smallest stir of movement. You paused beneath an ancient cedar, its bark rough and peeling beneath your frozen fingertips. The air smelled sharp here, pine and damp earth mingled in the faint, dankness of thaw long past. You noticed again the faint pulse of life beneath the cold, a subtle heat barely perceptible, as if the world itself was holding on to its last breath before surrendering fully to winter's grasp. A distant owl called out, hollow and patient, echoing in the quiet like a soft summons. You pressed onward, moving deliberately, slow enough to feel every inch of the path beneath your boots, the rough scrape of bark against your gloves, the cool sting of wind brushing your face. The snow shifted quietly at your feet, whispering fragile secrets of frozen solitude. Ahead, an abrupt clearing broke the monotony of the trees. Moonlight spilled unevenly across the surface, glinting off patches of ice that coated twisted roots and dead leaves. You knelt, brushing snow gently aside, revealing a cluster of stones ringed in frost, a forgotten marker pushed low by winter's weight. The air here was stiller, heavier, the silence folding inward like a tightened coil. You reached out slowly, fingers grazing the icy surface, feeling the faint trace of warmth lingering beneath the cold stone. There was something here, something old and patient, waiting in the deep freeze where the forest leaned in close, pressing its breath against your skin. Your heart beat steady but loud in your ears, the rhythm slow and insistent. A sudden sound cracked through the stillness, a faint rustling to your right, leaves skittering across frozen ground, distant but deliberate. You froze, breath hitching painfully in the cold air, eyes straining toward the shifting shadows between the trunks. Movement flickered at the edge of your vision, a shadow detached from the darkness, thin and swift, melding once again with the night. You pressed your body low, muscles coiled beneath the weight of cold and expectation. The forest felt impossibly vast, yet closed in tight, as if its quiet breath had turned watchful and wary. The scent of pine grew sharper, mingling with the stale sweetness of frozen rot. Your fingers curled into fists, steadying the cool weight of the kindling, fragile against the tightening tension. Slowly, the chill brushed like a whispered warning against your neck, a silent thread stretching taut between you and the shadow beyond. You knew then that the night carried a secret deeper than cold, a presence riding the frost silently, waiting to unravel the fragile order of shadow and light that now held the village in its icy grip. And as you rose, the shadow shifted again, deliberate, patient. It stepped closer, without sound, a slow breath merging with the night's cold, and the quiet unraveling had begun. You stepped away from the window, the fragile warmth of the fire retreating like a timid whisper behind you. The cold, relentless and insistent, pressed its icy fingers against your skin once more, teasing through the thin fabric of your coat and settling deep in your bones. The room's shadows stretched, long and thin, curled around the corners in slow spirals as the remaining embers caught fleeting glimpses of light before winking out. You felt the breath of winter in every pulse of frozen air. Your fingers closed tightly around the wooden ladle once more, rough and cold beneath your palm, grounding you in the solid present. You lifted it carefully. The grain's texture, a small but meaningful tether against the vast silence. The kettle whispered faint steam into the air, tendrils curling gently upward and filling the space with a muted warmth that seemed both fragile and defiant. You moved with measured grace, each motion deliberate and slow, giving weight to each second as the cold tried to quicken your heartbeat. The ritual of tea-making stretched on, a slow dance of heat meeting chill. You dipped the ladle into the steaming water, feeling the fragile warmth spread through the wood to your fingertips, despite the chill that clung to your hands. The soft hiss as water touched the cup echoed in the quiet room, sharp yet gentle, like a secret kept between you and the winter night. Steam unfurled, curling lazily like low smoke, fragrant with the faint, swampy earthiness of the tea. Leaves, the scent anchored you, a tether to the life still present despite the cold's heavy hand. You cradled the steaming cup, its warmth radiating softly into your palms, a delicate contrast to the creeping ice pressing at your face through the frosted window. Your breath slipped out in small clouds that dissipated instantly, lost to the endless stillness wrapping the village. Your eyes drifted upward again, drawn toward the frost-veined glass, where the skeletal silhouettes of trees lay outstretched like frozen sentinels, their branches wove together, tracing patterns you could almost follow with your gaze, fragile as frost lace. In that dim, muted light, the shadow stirred again. It shifted, subtle and still, an opaque shape blending seamlessly into the skeletal branches beyond. You caught your breath, the cold knot tightening in your chest, sharp and insistent. The quiet was no longer just emptiness. It was full of waiting, a paused breath between worlds. Your fingers tightened around the cup, the thin ceramic warm against your numbing skin. A quiet comfort amid the growing tension. Setting the cup slowly on the low table, you moved toward the door, every step measured, as if the ground might fracture beneath the weight of too much haste. Outside, the world was an ocean of white and gray, each snowflake crystallized with patience, each breath a timid ghost lingering in the air before vanishing into the depths. The village made no sound but its own steady, measured pulse. The soft groan of ice shifting, the crackling whisper of frozen branches swaying under unseen currents. The cold settled around you like a thick shroud as you stepped outside, the night immediately drawing you into its embrace. Boots sunk slightly into the powdery crust, each imprint fading almost as soon as it was made, erased by unseen frost hands. You adjusted the bundle of kindling at your side, the dry sticks brittle but precious, their promise a tiny rebellion against the endless freeze. Ahead, the path narrowed into a sliver of shadow between the bent and frost-bound trees. The gnarled limbs arched overhead like the ribs of a great frozen beast, their frosty tips dripping faint sparks of ice into the stiffened snow beneath. The scent of pine resin was sharp and persistent, cutting through the chill with hints of life clinging stubbornly beneath. Earth's damp scent, faint and lingering, rose in subtle waves, reminding you that beneath this endless winter, something fragile and unseen fought for breath. Your steps slowed further as the forest closed in tighter, the snow softening your footfalls to near silence. Every tiny noise seemed magnified, a falling flake sparking a muted patter, the delicate scrape of frost shifting on bark, a quiet crack as ancient ice shifted its weight with ghost-like patience. The night air was filled with a tension that weighed on you invisibly, pressing on the nape of your neck, tugging at the edges of your consciousness. You stopped at the edge of a shallow hollow, where the moonlight spilled faint and cold, glinting on ice-encrusted roots, tangled like serpents beneath a tangle of sleeping leaves. You knelt, the brittle snow crunching beneath your gloved hands as you traced the sharp silhouette of a stone half buried beneath frost. It was a forgotten marker, softened by time, but still solemn, a silent witness beneath the weight of snow and breathless cold. Your fingertips brushed the icy surface, and beneath the chill, you felt the barest hint of warmth, just a shiver, fragile and fleeting, as if the rock itself held a memory you could almost touch. A slow, steady pulse throbbed beneath the frozen silence, beneath the frost's grip, ending where the tangled wood met the earth. Then the rustle came again, sudden and sharp, a leaf sliding across brittle snow, too deliberate to slip unnoticed. Your gaze jerked to the shadow-thickened tree line. The night folded and refolded around a shifting shape, thin and deliberate. A dark silhouette weaving silently between trunks. Its presence was a breath drawn tight, a quiet thread fraying the edges of your carefully balanced calm. You pressed your palm to the rough bark of a nearby cedar, the cold seeping through your glove, anchoring you to the moment. Your lungs filled slowly as you held your breath, muscles taut beneath the weight of anticipation and winter's long, patient watch. The faint aroma of pine resin sharpened in the air, threaded with the subtle sweetness of frozen decay, a scent you recognized, even as it stirred old uncertainties. The shadow paused, a reluctant guardian, clinging just beyond the fragile circle of light. For a heartbeat, your eyes locked across the frozen void, not in fear, but in a silent acknowledgement of an unspoken game. Then it melted back into the ink-black night, leaving only the whisper of movement and a deep, echoing stillness. You exhaled slowly, the breath a reluctant surrender to the cold that tugged relentlessly at your edges. The night thickened, swallowing sound and warmth alike. Somewhere beyond, the forest held its secrets close, waiting for the brittle calm to shatter. And beneath the frozen sky, you understood. This was only the beginning of the long night's unraveling. The snow outside lay quiet and thick, a forgotten blanket folding the world into softness beneath an indifferent sky. Your boots faltered on the icy crust as you stepped once more beyond the fractured threshold of your door. The weight of kindling pressing gently against your ribs, a fragile warmth caught between your fingers despite the cold that seeped in around every edge. The village itself remained hushed. The faint groans of frozen timber and whispered sighs of frost settling into the earth beneath your feet. A quiet symphony played in the key of winter's slow decay. The moon hung low and pale, its light spilling weakly through the bare branches that stretched like twisted fingers across the sky. Each delicate crystal of ice that clung to the bark shimmered faintly as you passed, their fragile glints catching your eye and holding you in brief. Wonder before the biting chill urged you onward. Your breath rose, slow and steady clouds, dissipating into the vast silence. Each inhale tasting faintly of cold smoke and damp pine. The faint scent clung stubbornly in the air, weaving through the brittle frost like an echo of life defying the stillness. Ahead, the path narrowed beneath the low-pressed limbs of ancient cedars, their bark rough against your gloved fingertips as you brushed past. The trees seemed to lean closer, a careful congregation of watchers in the quiet night, shadows pooling thickly at their roots, as if hiding something just beyond the reach of sight. The snow beneath your steps gave a barely audible crunch, small and brittle, punctuating the stillness like a soft whisper breaking a spell. You paused, the weight of the cold pressing through your coat and settling deep within, a lingering ache threading through your bones. The kindling at your side felt heavier now, not with its own weight, but with unspoken meaning. This small act of gathering, of carrying warmth home through the frozen gloom, was a tether, a fragile line spun through the vast white silence that threatened to swallow everything whole. Your eyes flicked toward the inky veil of forest ahead, where the skeletal branches writhed gently in the wind's faint stir. The scent of resiny pine sharpened suddenly, mingling with the dankness of earth waking slowly beneath ice and snow. Somewhere beneath the frozen surface, life stirred quietly, an unseen pulse folded within the season's endless night. The air carried a faint rustle, sharp and deliberate, a sound too measured to be accidental. It tugged at the edges of your senses, a subtle call wrapped in shadow's hush. You pressed your palm to the rough bark of one towering tree, grounding yourself in its solid presence as your breath hitched. The faint scrape of something shifting, a twig perhaps, or the slow slide of frost loosening, broke the grip of silence. A shiver traced down your spine, cold and slow, as a shape flickered just beyond peripheral sight. It was gone before you could fully grasp it, a shadow severed from the dark, threading silently between trunks. Just beyond the fragile halo of moonlight, a deliberate pause lay heavy in the air. You felt it as a gathering stillness, patient and watchful, a tightening of breath held too long. The village behind you seemed distant now, swallowed by darkness's slow advance, leaving only the fragile promise of the firelight flickering softly in your memory. Your steps resumed, cautious and slow, each one a careful negotiation with the uneven ground. The fallen birch reappeared ahead, pale and fractured beneath the ice's grip. You knelt with deliberate care, brushing away a thin layer of powdery snow to reveal the frozen twig cluster nestled beneath. Your fingers trembled slightly as you gathered the brittle wood, each branch cracking faintly in muted protest, their fragile, dry warmth a rebellion against the unrelenting cold. You tucked the bundle against your side, the dry weight pressing close, a silent vow against the night's vast chill. The long return path stretched out before you, the fading light softening the world into blurred shapes of gray and white. The night deepened, thickening like slow honey, rich with a silence that pressed against your eardrums, wrapping tight and close. Your breath wove thin trails in the air, the rhythmic thud of your boots a steady heartbeat beneath the frozen. Hush! As you neared the village's edge once more, the shadows seemed to thicken, folding in tight around twisted branches that reached outward like frozen claws. The faint sound of shifting brush echoed close, soft and deliberate, as if the forest's breath whispered secrets you were not quite ready to hear. Your heart stepped faster, restrained yet insistent, while your eyes searched for the source beyond the brittle tree line. The forest held its breath, the night a living thing, pulsing slow and deep. Then, through the haze of frost and shadow, you caught a glimmer, a movement so slight it might have been your own imagination. The dark shape lingered for a heartbeat longer, a breath held in the cold. Then it slipped back, folding seamlessly into the ink-black woods, leaving behind only the faintest trace, a whisper of presence carved into the frozen stillness. You faltered. At the door to your home, the fragile circle of warmth, a shining promise beyond the walls coated in frost. The kindling felt impossibly light now, but its fire was a quiet urging, a summons to defy the endless cold, to pull back the night, one slow breath at a time. Inside, the hearth awaited, cold stone softened only by shadowed memory. You laid the wood gently, each stick a delicate thread of hope. Fingertips brushed the surface, tracing the rough grain, grounding you in this fragile moment, suspended between warmth and winter's long shadow. A slow inhale, the flint's bite against stone, a spark igniting the dry moss's sigh. The first flicker of flame whispered life into the darkness, a wavering glow that pushed the cold edge backward, if only for a moment. The fragile light danced across frost-veined windows, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to reach and pull at the edges of the room. And outside, beyond the fragile glass, the forest waited. Its breath was quiet, patient, a slow thread unraveling just beneath the surface of the frozen night. And in that fragile ember's glow, you sensed it. The long watch had just begun, and somewhere in the darkness beyond, the shadow moved again, deliberate and unseen, waiting for the night to unfold fully into its secret story. You lingered in the doorway for a breath, the lingering glow of embers fading like a whispered sigh behind you, swallowed slowly by the gathering dark. The cold stepped forward with quiet persistence, threading its icy fingers inside your coat, settled deep beneath skin and muscle. Your breath came in shallow clouds, each one dissolving as if the air itself were too frozen to hold warmth. The silence weighed heavy, a thick, viscous presence surrounding the village like a shroud spun from forgotten winters. Slow and steady, you lifted your feet, each step a careful negotiation with the brittle snow packed tight beneath. The crunch of ice and compressed frost was muted but definite, softer than before, as if the earth itself held its breath. Shadows from bent branches reached low, weaving a lattice of dark fingers on the snow's surface that trembled under the faintest stir of wind. You felt the press of unseen eyes, a quiet vigilance running like cold fire along your skin. The pine's sharp scent sliced through the stale winter air, a harsh promise in the vast stillness, and beneath it, the faint trace of damp earth sent a slow, steady pulse through your senses. Life lingered beneath the frozen crust, subtle and patient, like a secret waiting to be coaxed from sleep. Your fingers brushed rough bark as you passed the nearest cedar, each groove a frozen river winding frost and shadow. The coldness clung to your skin through the fabric, a ghostly echo of the season's long dominion. Ahead, the path dipped and narrowed between gnarled trees, bent under the weight of ice, their branches knitting slow patterns in the air. Each breath felt heavier now, a slow tightening twist inside your chest. You felt the weight of your kindling, fragile and dry, against your ribs. A delicate pulse of heat almost alive in contrast. The snow beneath your boots shimmered faintly with crusted frost. Every imprint you left was softened within moments, swallowed by the village's relentless quiet. The night held its breath, drawing tight around your shoulders like a frozen cloak. A distant call drifted across the stillness, soft, low, barely more than a murmur tangled in wind. Your steps faltered, senses straining. Just beyond the reach of the faint moonlight, shadows shifted. Something moved with slow, deliberate caution, dipping between the stiff branches as if no more substantial than mist curled against the cold. Your heart slowed, a steady drum beneath the silence. You stopped where the path opened to a small clearing, dusted with ice and fallen leaves, brittle and pale beneath the moon's pale gaze. Kneeling, you pushed aside a layer of powdery snow, sending faint clouds into the chilled air. Your hands sought the earth beneath, a rock half buried and frosted, cold to the touch, but beneath it a subtle warmth, like the first pulse of life after a long sleep. It whispered of distant seasons, secrets held deep below the frozen soil. A rustle broke the stillness, a whisper of dry leaves, sliding over ice near the tree line. Your eyes snapped to the sound, catching the blur of a shadow, severed from darkness, winding silently through the skeletal trees. It lingered just a moment, too brief for shape or meaning, yet enough to leave a thread of tension stretching taut in the night air. You rose slowly, every muscle tensed but controlled. The forest seemed to close tighter, limbs leaning, like watchful sentinels, drawing an unyielding curtain. Your breath plumed in slow, even waves, mingling with the faint crackle of ice breaking lightly somewhere far off. The scent of pine resin grew sharper, edged with a faint hint of something decayed and old, weaving through the cold air like a forgotten memory. The village sounded distant now, swallowed by night's advance. Your footprints pressed fresh impressions into the snow, but the biting wind hurried behind, erasing trails as it whispered secrets you could almost hear, but never quite grasp. The branches overhead tangled thickly, blotting out stars and promise alike, leaving only the dim, hesitant glow of moonlight kissing frost. You turned back toward the small cluster of houses, their paper windows sealed like fragile barriers against the dark. Each step slowed, weighted, not just by exhaustion, but by a creeping awareness. The fragile barrier of warmth behind you was a thin shield against what waited, patient and coiled, beyond. You traced your slow path, the outlines of frozen trees blurring like moving shadows, spectral guardians in a forgotten realm. Crossing the threshold of your home, the cold seemed to exhale, pulling away just enough to let the flickering light of the hearth reach you. The kindling pressed gently in your hands, a tangible thread pulling you back from the edge of the vast dark. You set it down slowly, the dry sticks whispering softly against the cold stone, each one a fragile lifeline sewn against the night's long silence. Your fingers trembled as you arranged the wood, each movement elongated and deliberate, drawing out the moment like a low burning candle. The flint sang sharp and bright against stone, a sudden flash breaking through the frozen quiet. The moss caught light with a slow, uncertain breath, flame licking at the fragile, dry heart of the bundle. Shadows curled and stretched along the walls, moving like slow dancers in the fire's tentative glow. The scent of burning wood mingled with the cold earth, still clinging to your clothes, a soft surrender of warmth to the frozen air. You inhaled deeply, letting the heat comfort that spread across your skin. The forest's breath pressed softly against the frost-veined windows, a whisper just beyond reach, restless and patient. Eyes drawn to the glass, you caught the flicker once more, shadowed movements threading through the skeletal branches like an unseen wind. Your chest tightened, a pale knot weaving cold through your veins. The night's slow unraveling had begun, wrapped in secrecy and breathless waiting. The fire's glow pulsed steady, fragile, but defiant. As the shadow paused, still, deliberate, poised on the edge of sight. And then, with the faintest stirring, it slipped forward, melting seamlessly into the darkness that now seemed to reach deeper than ever before. You stood frozen, breath caught between heartbeats, knowing that whatever waited in the silence was no longer content to linger unseen. The long night was awakening. You stood at the threshold of your home. The cold beyond, whispering in reluctant breaths, a quiet reminder of winter's endless watch. The fire's glow had dwindled to embers, fading softly into the growing dark, a gentle exhale of warmth retreating to memory. In your hands, the last fragments of kindling felt significant, as if carrying the fragile pulse of life itself through the frozen hush. The weight of the long night pressed lightly over your shoulders, but inside, a calm settled, a subtle thawing deep within the grasp of the cold. You closed the door behind you with measured care, the familiar creak a gentle statement of presence, a quiet defiance against the silence that enveloped the village. The hearth awaited, its stones cool but ready, like an old friend recalling the promise of light. You knelt, placing each brittle stick carefully, almost reverently, as if piecing together a delicate mosaic meant to hold the shadow of hope. Your fingers trembled slightly, not from cold alone, but from the fragile anticipation that clings to small victories in hard seasons. With a slow breath, you brought the flint to stone. The spark caught softly, a fleeting kiss of fire tracing its delicate path onto dry moss. The flame stirred, flickering timidly, then growing in quiet dignity as it reached out to cradle the kindling. Shadows danced along the walls, weaving gentle ripples that softened the shapes of frost on the windows. Wrapped in this tenderness of warmth, you sank back slightly, letting your breath steady as the fire blossomed. The scent of burning wood mingled with the earth's lingering dampness, blending into a quiet symphony that seemed to fill the space between moments with something like solace. Outside, the forest exhaled its frosted breath, the skeletal branches still, weaving their slow patterns against the indigo sky. But inside, the cold lost its sharp edge, the heavy silence easing into a companionable hush. You watched the flames lean toward the hearth's heart, slow and sure, each flicker a whisper of resilience, each glow a soft promise. Your eyes drifted to the frost-veined glass, where the shadow you had sensed lingered one last time, not threatening, but hesitant, a quiet resident of the night's vast domain. It hovered gently beyond the fragile light, a presence folded within the dark, like a secret finally at rest. For a long moment, you simply breathed, the rhythm steady and slow. The fire's glow wrapped tenderly around you, a delicate shield against the lingering chill. You could almost taste the warmth pooling deep in your chest, a balm brewed not just from flame, but from the unyielding resolve to endure. You rose slowly, each movement softening as the night around you seemed to turn down its volume. The village, wrapped tight beneath its icy cloak, felt less like a prison and more like a fragile cradle, holding you and the world in suspension between shadow and light. Your gaze found the steaming cup of tea resting on the low table, the faint scent mingling with the pulsing warmth ahead. Lifting it gently, you cradled the fragile vessel, feeling its heat bloom through your fingers like a whispered benediction. The silence around you deepened into something kinder, a subtle lull that seemed to reach out, coaxing a slow, peaceful exhale. Outside, beyond the fragile glass, the wind had fallen still. The forest's breath had stilled, the watching shadows faded into the gentle fold of night's embrace. The long vigil of the cold was ending, not with a moment, thunderous claim, but with a patient, knowing retreat, as if the world itself acknowledged the quiet victory of warmth born from endurance. You settled back, the firelight casting slow, wavering shapes that softened the edges of the room. The faint crackle of the hearth became a cradle song, a soft rhythm weaving through your senses and threading closure through the silence. Your eyelids, heavy and sure, began their slow descent. The cold no longer pressed with cruel insistence. It had become part of a larger quiet, a symphony with interludes of flame and breath. The night, expansive and dark, held you gently in its fold, a timeless moment folded into the tapestry of frozen stillness and fragile light. As you drifted, the final whisper of flame lingered, a tender pulse echoing the steadfast heart of the fire, and the soft promise of morning just beyond the horizon. The shadow at the window remained still, no longer a threat, but a quiet witness to the night's unfolding, an unseen guardian of the delicate calm. And so the village lay enveloped, wrapped in the deep hush of the endless winter, yet softly kindled by a glimmer of warmth, a flame slow and steady, holding the night at bay, inviting you into rest, into peace, into the gentle unfolding of dreams beneath the watchful stars. The long night had come to its stillness. Your breath and the fire's song merged into one, a fading echo of resilience,